Hello, I'm Joe Finney,
I'm Matt Lacey.
and this is part two of improving the XAML of Simple QR Code Maker. So, if you want to see all about what the app is, what it looks like, the little improvements we did in part one, we'll link that in the description. So, in part two, we're going to dig into the main QR content. So, in the app, it creates and shows QR codes. But if you have multiple QR codes in that text box or multiple URLs, it will show multiple, and they are images that are displayed in a grid view. And it becomes pretty problematic pretty quickly, as you can see how indented the XAML is here. We have an image inside of a grid. The image has a context fly out, and there's a bunch of there's commands bound into that. The binding, there's like some complicated path here with the binding and the element name. So it's kind of a mess the way that it binds back to the page view model instead of the item template there. So that definitely is something that needs to get fixed there. And part of what makes it a mess is because we have dragging. So you can click and drag these QR codes out of the app into whatever app you want to use them in, whether it's Photoshop or an email or into a folder on your desktop or something. And right now, you can't bind. At the time of building this app, I didn't spend the time to figure out how to bind a command in a view model, like using MVVM style with dragging. So I just mixed and matched the code behind, which is what this is, and binding commands, which is not a good practice. And I knew this needed to get fixed, but I was like, I don't really know the best way to go about it. So Matt Lacey is going to tell us how to do it.
Okay, well we're gonna take this big block of 50, 60 lines of code out of the main page, and we'll put them somewhere separate, and we'll look at the consequences of that. It may not be considered best practice to mix events and commands, but you've got something that works. That's good enough. It makes it hard to test, but then we haven't got any tests in this code yet, so maybe that's something we can look at another time. But let's dive in. So we're gonna move all this code out of the main page into its own little control. This control is going to be what's used inside the item template, so it kind of makes sense for it to all be together. And then we'll deal with the consequences of pulling that out to somewhere separate. And then obviously we've got the event handlers, and we've got 5 commands and an info bar. It's a grid with 2 things in it. It shouldn't be that complicated, but look at the length of the video. It's not straightforward. So let's start by creating a new control, shall we?
All right. So go into Solution Explorer.
Yeah.
Add a new item. Do we want to make a control or a user control?
User control.
All right.
So the difference between custom control and user control, they're very similar. Generally, if you're building a control which you're going to use within your own app, you want a user control. If you're making a control which is going to sit in the library and you're going to use in lots of different places, you probably want a custom control.
Got it. So what are we going to call this?
What do you think would be a good name for the
QR
the image thing?
Code image control.
Okay.
There we go.
Okay, and at the moment it has an empty grid in it. And let's replace that with the grid from our main page.
So this whole item right here.
This whole thing, the entire contents of the data template. That's the one. You can copy it for now.
To see everything that breaks.
Okay. And so immediately the first thing that's going to break is it doesn't know anything about any data context anymore. There is no data context anymore. So let's create dependency property. The name escaped me for a minute. So we can just bind the data and handle the data bindings like we did previously.
All right. I'll hit F7 to jump to the code behind. So prop dp to create the dependency property. This is going to be a bar code image item. And last time we called it data.
Yep.
Okay, tab of type owner class.
Is our QR code image control.
Okay, and default null.
Yeah, I think we can do default null.
All right. Remove that comment. Remove some of these empty lines.
Okay. So now we can go back to the XAML file and point everything at the data. So it's
data dot, right?
And as with last time, the default for an X bind is for one-time binding, but because of the order of things being created, now we want a one-way binding. So mode one way, yeah.
And I think that was on the history item where it worked when it was all in one control, but when we broke it out, it stopped working.
Yeah, because when it's in the template in an item template is created when there is data. What's going to happen now is it's going to create the control, then it's going to bind the data to it, and so the binding will try and resolve when it's first created, but because there isn't any data yet, it won't load. So we need to say, well, one time, not just one time, one way. So whenever the data is set, then you update the binding.
Got it.
So that's what we're doing here.
All right, and that works for the image itself. So that's the code as bitmap.
And
the
info bar, do the info bar, which is below the context menu, and then we'll come back to
URL warning. And that also needs to be one way. Okay. And again, if people are noticing that this is wrapping, that's the XAML styler extension. And I made it so that it will style my binding and xbind.
Yeah, so now we've got all these menu flyer items. Now, the way they worked previously is what you've got a command on the main view model, and you're passing a copy of the item to that command, which is this parameter with this xbind, the command parameter, and then that then takes that value and uses it inside the command.
Do we want to take a look? We can pull that up real quick.
Yeah.
That's the main view model. And those are the
So if you look at something like the, yeah.
Save code PNG context.
There we go.
So it takes in the command parameter, which we then check to make sure that it's a barcode image item. If it's not, it returns. And then it uses that image item and it does a save single file, which is a method within the view model here.
Okay, so yes, so we've got these commands, and they call other methods, which then call other methods, and this is where it starts to get a bit complicated.
And this, I think, when I was originally thinking about how I could break this out, I was like, oh, easy. I'll just put that logic in this control. But then it calls this save single, which then calls these other methods, which call, so I'm like, how? All of these methods and are all within this view model, which is probably not, again, best practice. But I think it's pretty, I would guess this is maybe why a lot of people have complicated XAML, because their view models or their code behind is more complicated than it should be.
I don't know if more complicated than it should be. There are always different ways of doing things and different preferences for those things, and yeah, but it's these things, were built all together and they work all together. So taking them apart is often tricky.
Mm-hmm.
But there are some things we can do here. So I think the easiest way to start is to take all these commands which are used in our new control, and we will put them. I think the best place to put them is on the barcode image item. So rather than pass this thing around and say, hey command, go and do this, hey command, go and do that, why don't we just have the item know about how to do all the things that it needs to do?
That makes sense. Yeah, these are all these functions are methods dealing with saving it out as a file, as a PNG file or an SVG, or putting it in the clipboard, but it all has to do with the data contained in this model. So that makes sense to me.
So if I was starting from scratch or rewriting completely, I might have a separate service which has everything to do with generating images or everything to do with writing things to files. But because we kind of do an incremental step-by-step, how do we refactor this, I think this is a good next step.
Got it.
So we have this barcode image item, and at the moment it is a model. Well, it is in your models namespace.
Mm-hmm.
And what constitutes a model? What constitutes a view model? It's a highly opinionated thing. And there are lots of people who say, oh, it's easy, it's really clear, what you need is you just do this. And their just is their own opinion and their own reasoning, and it may not work always, and it may not work everywhere, and it doesn't really matter most of the time. What we've got is this class is a thing which we pass around to the UI and is used in the UI layer, and it has some functionality that also isn't strictly tied to the UI, so it's kind of a view model anyway. So let's treat it as a view model. We can move it if you want, or we could just keep using it as is, as a view model. And the big thing that is going to be different is we're going to want it to be able to execute our commands. And the commands are created through the generator from the MVVM toolkit,
Mm-hmm.
or community-toolkit.mvvm. And that all works via those attributes. And that works because of functionality tied to the base class of our of the view model. So it's tied to being an observable recipient, and so our barcode image item needs to be an observable recipient as well.
All right. So we will make this an observable recipient.
And it needs to be a partial as well.
And it's public.
Yep.
All right, so that's the right order. And when I did that, it added the namespace up at the top. Community, toolkit, MVVM, component model.
Okay, so now we can take those commands from our main view model and bring them in here.
I think they're all together here, so maybe I'll just copy them all. So save code PNG context, save code SVG, copy code PNG, and copy code SVG, and a copy SVG text.
Yeah.
Okay, copy or cut, what do you think?
Let's be brave and cut.
All right. And we put that all...
Yeah, into our image item. Lots of red squigglies. We should probably think about the damage we've just done where we've removed it from. So because we've taken all those things out of the main view model, the code we left in the main page XAML file now is going to be complaining that those things don't exist. So we should probably comment out that code. So we could take the whole grid.
Yeah, so we can take this whole grid. Then we copied this out, and we can replace it with the
I think it's
QR code image. Okay, and then data.
And we just want to expand the instance of the barcode image item, yeah.
Just like that. So this should be similar. I think we did the same thing with some previous controls in the last video.
So that's that file. That was the easy bit.
Mm-hmm.
And now we can go and look at our barcode image item. Let's go and grab the save single method as well, and then come back and think about it in main view model.
All right. Save single.
Did you cut or did you copy?
Copy.
Okay. So there are other places in main view model which call that code, and I don't think we need them. So let's look.
Okay.
Let's go back to main view model, and you'll see there are two places that call that code.
So if the code is count one, save single, otherwise save all.
And what save all does is it just loops over them.
Okay. So
I don't
you're
think
right.
you need that first clause at all. And before you delete it, if you notice, it says if there's one, call save single and then return. So line 460 returns. But if you look further down, line 468, there's more code that tries to execute if there's only one. So you'll never get that message come out.
You're right.
So I think that's a really good reason to take out that if there's only one, do this special case. Otherwise, do the loop over all of them and treat them each individually the same way you treat them in save single.
That's a good point. So I'm going to delete this. And now we'll get that message. And if we go down, save SVG has the same problem. So I'm going to delete that. Now if we search for save single, this is unused and it's grayed out. So I'm going to delete it.
Ooh.
Look at that.
So we've got all the logic for working with individual images, individual QR codes in one place in this file, which is our representation of a single image. So let's go back to barcode image item and think about all these commands we've just brought in, all these 5 commands. So each of them worked previously on the basis that it was going to be passed a copy of the barcode image item, and now it doesn't need that. Now it already is a barcode image item, so we don't have to pass in all these parameters. So we can completely remove the parameter from the method.
Well, I'll start with the easy ones.
Okay. Yeah, and so we can remove that guard clause as well.
For now,
yes,
I guess
we can take that as well.
We can take it out.
Yeah, we'll need to change save single because at the moment it was expecting something to be passed in.
All right, save single. So we don't need to pass something in because the item that we have is this item.
Is that thing, yeah. So we can
just say
that.
Code as text. Code as bitmap. And write to image file does not exist in this instance.
Write image to file is complicated. See, in my ideal world, I would have the writing stuff to files isolated in a separate place. And without doing a lot of refactoring, that's going to get tricky. So I think for today, I'd propose that we go and find the right image to file in the main view model.
Oh, right here.
There it is. And you'll notice that in it, all it does is it says, depending on the type of file, do these things. So let's just take that code and
copy it.
Yeah, I would just take the contents of the file, or the method rather,
Ah,
and then
and just put it here.
yeah. And again, so we don't need these image items. Yeah.
Thank you, Visual Studio.
There are some properties we need to think about. We'll come back to those as well. There's a lot of moving parts. I appreciate, and we're breaking stuff all over the place.
Yep. And so this is the foreground of the QR code and the background of the QR code, which are color pickers that are above and outside where the QR code is. So I think this is, again, one of the challenges of when you start to break stuff apart. Previously, the QR code was kind of in the same space as the color pickers, and now they're not, but they have to know about each other. So how do we communicate that information without them being in the same space?
Okay, if we go back to the main view model, and there's a method generate QR code from one line.
Yep.
And if you look at around line 230, this is where our barcode image item is created, and then it gets added to the collection which generates the images, and this is what's used to create the images. So what we could do is we could just add some properties to our barcode image item so it knows about the current selected option or the selected error correction level, the foreground color, the background color, etc.
That makes sense to me.
So these don't need to be dependency properties, they can just be regular properties. And there are Windows UI color for the colors.
Yeah, when it adds a namespace, it
Yeah.
does not like that. Okay, I might need to fully qualify this. Because we're using Z.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, there's ZXing is the library that does the QR code generation. And this is going to be, why don't we call it the same thing? Okay, foreground. And background. Okay.
So we need to set those when we're what doesn't it like? What's that green squiggle about?
Because it's not nullable, so we may either have to say required so that it can't exit the constructor without setting it.
Oh, okay. So let's go and set those things. Yeah.
Yep. There we go.
Simple.
And now, selected option, that's what it was called. I'm going to change
So
that.
Selected option
is the error correction level, yeah.
Is an error. There's an error correction option class which contains the error correction level and a description of the error correction level.
Oh, that's a good point. I got to make sure I...
But we only need the level, we don't need the description, so it's...
Okay.
So that's all good. So our method down at the bottom here, we should just be error correction.
There we go.
Hooray. So that class, that method at the bottom, what it was doing, instead of calling out to the other method, it's now going save PNG to storage file if it's a PNG, and that's an extension method on the bitmap. And the save code is SVG file, or I don't know where that is. It's probably elsewhere in this file.
It is, yep. So this, to your point, this model was already working kind of as a view model because it had functions where you could call stuff like save this as an SVG. So I didn't do enough to make it easy to break stuff out. So I had some functions in there. There are some methods here like this. And now we're just adding more.
Yeah. So we started refactoring the save code PNG context and the save code SVG context, didn't we?
Yes, and these look to be all green.
So now they are not accepting parameters, but if we jump back to the XAML file,
they still have...
we're trying to pass parameters.
Right. So I should clear that.
So we don't need to do that. And also, the commands aren't on a different element on the main page. They are just on the control themselves. So we can still need the binding keyword, but yeah.
This is the copy PNG. So copy code PNG context command. Save. Nope. Right. This is save code PNG context command.
Yeah. So we can take out that parameter.
Yep. And then eliminate the parameter.
What we can also do here is we can remove those names. So we don't need to assign names to these things because we never refer to them by name. So now we've gone from 5 parameters to 3, and we've got a simplified binding. And we can do the same to the others as well while we're here. Why not? Okay, and so now we need to go back to those other commands and update them so they don't need parameters and things.
Barcode image item and take out all the command parameters.
So we've got those guard clauses and reference to some things as well. Okay, and all our squigglies now are about the code info bar messages. Is that right?
That is what these are. And all of these are an error, basically, if you try to set content and you fail.
These are two things. These are showing an error message if something goes wrong, and showing a success message if something goes right. This is done on the main view model level. This is shown in an info bar. There's lots of info bars. This is the info bar at the bottom of the main page, not the one that lives with each control, with each QR code. Is that right?
Right. Yep.
So this is functionality we want the main view model to take care of.
Yes.
So we've got this code, which we've seen is in lots of places throughout all these methods, which is trying to say, show a happy message, show a sad message, or a success message, error message. And it does that by setting all these... It did that in the old way by setting a load of properties on the main view model, which all work together in a special way and produce the desired result. Is my probably impolite way of describing it. And what we want from a better maintainability perspective is this logic to all be encapsulated. From the perspective of this control, what we want to do is we want to say, hey, view model, main view model, go and show your success measure, or hey, app, however that works or exists, show this success message or show this error message. And there are lots of ways to do that, but I think the easiest way to do that here would be to use some kind of messenger. And so we will just say, send a message that says, hey, bit of the app that shows these messages, show this message. And we don't need to know about all the properties or all the different rules of what things you need to set or whether you need to start the timer. I couldn't work out what the rules are about when you need to start the timer or not. So that logic should all be in one place. Not here, it should be where that all gets shown. One way to do that will be to send a message which has all this information in it. So why don't we create a class to encapsulate this message, which will, all this information which we're going to send as a message.
Sounds good. So a model?
Yeah, it could be a model.
All right.
It's quite common to messages in a folder called messages or a namespace called messages, but it's just a model. It's just a bit of information. It doesn't matter what it's called or where it is really, as long as it's understandable. We can put it in models.
Yep. And what do we want to call it? Like error message? Or
well, it could be a
QR code
success
failure
message. Why don't we just call it a request to show a message? So request show message is a name that springs to my mind.
All right. Request show message.
And this is going to need some properties. It's going to need properties for each of the different things which were set in the other code.
Got it.
So it's like a title, message, and a severity. Okay. And now we might want to create a constructor or a helper just to make setting these things a bit simpler.
With all the properties there?
One for all of them would probably be we might want to make other versions for just showing success or just showing an error, just to make it clear which properties you need to set. Because I think in the code, if it's a success, it doesn't show the message. The message is blank and things like that. But let's work with what we've got for now. So let's jump back over to our barcode image item. And instead of some of this code, we make a... is that the right one? Oh, no, I put it in the wrong place. Something like this. So, this is... So, instead of doing that, we're going to create a message, and what we need to do now is we also need to send it. So I'm going to use some functionality which is available in the Community Toolkit library, which we're already referencing, which is the weak reference messenger. You might need to add the namespace. Okay, so what we're doing now is we're saying, instead of setting all these properties, we're going to send a message to something which can do something with it. Okay?
Yeah, right now this is just sending it out saying, I don't care who deals with this, but I want to send a message.
Yeah. And what we need to do is we want to tell our main view model, which is where all these properties exist, to listen for those messages. If we can find the main view model. We'll both look for it at the same time. And down in the constructor, as good as any, about line 160. I'm going to tell it, hey weak reference messenger, I want you to register for this message type, and when you receive it, you're going to pass that message to the onRequestShowMessage method, which we're going to make look like this. So here's our requestShowMessage, and we're just going to take all those properties, apply them to the we're going to take all those values which we set on the message, apply them to the properties on the view model, which will cause everything to be shown. Just through looking at the code yesterday, I couldn't work out the logic about when the timer should be started or not. Do you know when the timer should be started or not?
So yeah, so basically if it's a happy message, then we want to show a temporary info bar, because it's kind of annoying whenever someone says like, hey, this was successful, and then you have to go click and dismiss it. So if it's successful, show it. If it's not successful, I want the user to have to acknowledge it, to be like, hey, you know, something bad happened. You need to acknowledge that something bad happened, and then you can go back and try something different. If you're not paying attention, you miss the message. But if something good happened, the message is kind of, oh, cool. Otherwise, yeah.
I suspected it might be something like that. But now we've got a way of sending messages and them being shown. And we can send these messages from anywhere, and our main view model will do whatever it needs to, the appropriate thing to cause them to be displayed. Therefore, all the logic about setting the show code info bar to true, setting all the 3 different other properties that need to be set, whether the timer should be started or not, that's now all in one place. So our code is that little bit more contained and hopefully easier to maintain. And we can have other things send those messages requests if they need to. So we need to now go back to our other item and send those messages.
So again, that was eliminating all of this code. I'm just going to clear it out here.
Okay.
And consolidated it into this single line using the weak reference messenger, which again is a part of the toolkit here. So that's the community toolkit.mvvm.messaging.
Yeah. And so it's a weak reference messenger, which means it's not keeping strong references to things. So it's not going to prevent any memory management cleanup or anything. Everything will get disposed of correctly. We don't have to worry about unsubscribing for the things we send.
All right. And error. Okay. And eliminate that. Boom. And so now this is the same functionality in all the errors. So we can just...
and so the thing I said which was going to make it not work yet was the event handler, which was in mainpage.xaml.cs.
And that would be the dragging of the item?
The QR code image underscore drag starting, yes.
Oh, this is unused.
That's the one.
So we want to move this.
This is
code.
unused because we cut the code out of main page. We need to cut this and paste it into the new control. So the QR code image control.xaml.cs.
Oh, it needs to use extensions. Okay. And then we don't have a view model anymore.
Yeah. So let's comment that out for now. But
yeah. We could do the same thing where we do a message.
Yep.
All right, it succeeded. So when I took away that required keyword and just set a default level, it seemed to accept it. All right, that's exciting. Do we just want to try to run it?
Yeah.
All right, so here we go. We're going to run it.
It compiles doesn't mean it works.
Yeah.
Let's
now the
find out
question
what
is
else
whether
doesn't work.
Yeah. All right, I'm going to interact with the app. Add a QR code or some text there, and I'm going to open the XAML live preview. Okay.
Yep.
That looks real, and I can.
Let's try changing the colors. That was
Oh.
So change the transparency bar. Yeah, there we go.
There we go.
And the colors will change as well.
That's
if you go to
exciting.
settings and ask for it to warn when it's not a QR code. So settings in the app.
Warning. Okay.
Or when it's not a URL.
And I'm going to
Live
open the
preview
preview again. There we go. I changed the settings, and the warning now shows. That's great.
So that's all the visual functionality, and now it's the context menus that we need to...
Right. So if I right-click this and say... is this... It's not staying open, is it? I'm going to pin this.
Pin it.
It's too many things. Too many. I'll just zoom in here so maybe we can see the context menu. Nope, it does not show.
Okay.
All right, I will copy the PNG, and doesn't look like it's doing anything.
Okay, so let's look at the output window. Bottom right. Do we have any warnings about the bindings?
Oh, we can see XAML binding, and I'm not seeing any failures.
Let's set a breakpoint in one of those, in the command that gets called when you right-click them.
Yeah, which would be in the barcode image item. In the, let's say, the save PNG code context. Okay, add a breakpoint right here. Now I'm going to right-click and say save PNG, and it does not fire.
Oh, okay. What I suspect is happening is that there is a binding failure, but it's being hidden by the wonders of Xbind. Yeah, see, I'm not sure about Xbind being the recommended way.
You're not a fan of Xbind?
It's more performant at runtime, but how much runtime use do we need to save the ages we've spent trying to figure out what's going on? You know, if it's saving milliseconds, how does that balance out against the developer hours?
Absolutely. No, you're right. But this is definitely, again, one of those things where you get it working, and then you're like, I'm going to move one thing, and then you cannot, for the life of you, figure out why now you have to set a one-way mode on a command when previously you didn't have to. Because if we go back to it main page, binds to commands all over the place.
Yeah.
And they are not. They're Xbind to the view model, and there's no mode at all, and it works fine. So it's very strange and frustrating that we would have to do it this way. But for now, you know what? We're not going to question it too much, and we're just going to move on.
So if you want to know why it works in your main page previously, if you look at mainpage.xaml.cs, and up in the constructor, you'll notice that the view model is set before you call initialize component. An initialize component is when it looks at all everything in the XAML or the BAML or whatever intermediate thing it's being compiled into, and it tries to resolve all those bindings. And here, view model is set. In the other instance, where initialize component is called on our control, it builds the control, and then we set the data property. So the data didn't exist when it built the control, but the view model does exist when it builds the main page. That's why you get the different behaviors.
There we go. Now we know why it works.
So it's that some people get really upset about doing things before and after initialize component, and it does, or it can have a big impact on how bindings are resolved and other things as well. If we could say, when you make an image control, do it with this data or with this barcode image item, we could add something into that construct. We could, have a version of that constructor which takes a parameter and then use that to set the data or the view model or the data context before. But there isn't a way to do that with a data template item like we've got. Because all we're doing is the XAML gets passed, it goes, oh, I need a copy of this control, I will create one. And then it says, oh, and it's got a property of data which is set to this, therefore I will set the property, but it's already been created. So it's just kind of knowing about that life cycle, which is useful. And, I'm sure there's a better way of describing it than I've tried to here, but that's...
That does make sense. And that kind of, it's a deeper level of understanding of why these two things that seem to work exactly the same do not work exactly the same. Because here we're initializing this control. All of the work of this control only exists inside of a data template, inside of an item template in the grid view. The main page is not being created like that. So it's just being created differently. So the code is going to look a little bit different. And a lot of the places where the code is going to be different is going to have to do with initialization, because this does things, it initializes the data and the control in a different order than when the main page is created. So it's just going to be different.
Yeah, I wonder if there are ways that can be. There's definitely ways that can be made better. I wonder if there are workarounds which we haven't figured out yet. Haha, for another time.
Mm-hmm.
Right, so that works. The thing you haven't tried, did you try the dragging just to make sure that works as well?
I have not. Let me try and run it again. And it works. I have the image file that I dragged into File Explorer.
We've done what we set out to do, which was to move all that bit of UI and all the container logic into somewhere else, somewhere central. And we've started to touch upon some ideas about how that also allowed us to refactor the code. We've got that messaging system now for communicating with the main view model, where we've got this one central part of the code where it does something specific, and we don't really want to have direct relationships or direct connections between them. So we've just got this weak reference messenger way of just saying, whoever deals with this, go and deal with this. Mm-hmm. And we send the message and hope it works. I'm not a massive fan of using messengers because they're really hard to test, because it's not just a case of you want to test that this thing sends the right message. You also want to make sure that this other thing there's something else listening for the right message at the right time, and testing that can get very tricky.
Right,
so if you've got something where you have a direct relationship, that's obviously a lot easier to test. But for something like this, I think it works fine. If there was a scenario where a message didn't get shown, probably wouldn't be the end of the world. But
right, yeah. So this is just showing an info bar. So if that failed, info bar doesn't show. That's not critical functionality. It really helps clean up the code from we're not like passing in a reference to the main page info bar all the way down into every single. So yeah, we're avoiding that type of we're abstracting it, but then we're also we're coupling it again. So this definitely seems like a great solution. And so we add the reference to this barcode image item. So it sends the message, and then we receive the message in the main view model. Here we have we register it in the constructor, and when it gets called, it calls this method, and boom, fires the code. That's pretty great.
There are other places which try and show messages, aren't there? And they could obviously send messages now rather than setting those properties themselves.
Which is kind of the point we talked about in the first video, where we made, I think it was the icon and text button. And we were focused on trying to simplify this one page, but there are many other pages in the app that also have icon and text buttons. So it makes sense that once you kind of focus on refining your one problematic XAML file, or you're, reducing some of the logic in your view model, you're going to make some extra helper files, and then you can go throughout the app and look for other opportunities for where that same code can be used to simplify the app overall.
There are other ways of doing it as well. So that we could have a different message for a success and different message for a failure. We could, and obviously then we need to listen for the different types of messages. Mm-hmm. But that might be another way of encapsulating that logic as well. I think it's just a case of seeing. I think a lot of this is having another person's view on the code, saying, "Oh, you could do it like this because X, Y, and Z," and hopefully my X, Y, and Zs are useful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. And kind of as I said on the last video, when you're just focused on an app that works, this app works. And I know you've said it multiple times, what is good, what is bad, what is best. That all is very relative to a person's opinion. So I was basically looking at this thinking, you know what, how would someone else, refine this XAML to be more robust. And you introduced a few concepts that are definitely I'm going to use when I go forward in my other apps, because I have a lot of other apps. So this is going to be great. I mean, this messenger for sure for sending little notifications to the user is going to be really handy. But yeah, it's definitely easier to see how you could break out elements of the XAML, break them into smaller controls, reuse those controls, and just keep doing that. And it makes the app a lot more easy to maintain for me personally, and a lot more fun to create new features.
Brilliant.